Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and you all know I love retro technology. I mean, look around me here. This is like a shrine to my midlife crisis in motion, and nothing excites me more than the Sega Genesis, and I always love having things that are new paired up with things that are old. And on my desk here, I've got an old Model 2 Sega Genesis with a brand new flash cartridge from a little company out of Europe called Terraonion, and this might be the ultimate flash cartridge that you can get on the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive. And let me show you the sorcery that this thing can do. So we're on the main menu here. We're going to select this game. And remember, we don't have a Sega CD attached to this console here. You can see it's just standing alone. But look at this. Not only do we get the Sega CD BIOS loading up here, but if I hit the start button, it's actually going to run a CD game from the micro SD card that is inside this cartridge, all through the cartridge slot. The original Sega CD, of course, had to attach to the side of the device, but here we go. We've got Sonic CD running without a CD just through this Mega SD cartridge, and inside of it, it is actually simulating the Sega CD hardware through a field programmable gate array processor, or FPGA, and we're able to get all this cool new stuff working on this old console with the original hardware. And there's a lot more to this, and we're going to explore some of what you can do here in just a second. But I do want to give you my usual disclaimers here that I paid for the flash cartridge here with my own funds. It took a long time to get it. All the opinions you're about to hear are my own. Nobody is paying for this review, nor has anyone reviewed or approved what you're about to see before it was uploaded. So let's get into it now and explore some of the things that you can do with this flash card. So let's take a closer look now at the hardware. This is not inexpensive. It's about 230 euros, which translates out to about 260 US dollars, and that's just for the cartridge. You still need a console to play it on. It will work on original hardware like my Model 2 Genesis here. It will also work with the Model 1 that I have behind me there. The Model 3, though, will require an audio modification to work properly. Interestingly enough, this will also work with the Sega Nomad, which was the portable Sega Mega Drive Genesis console. If that gets audio modded, you can run the CD games on that too. So they figured out there was more to the cartridge slot than we were led to believe 25 years ago. You can actually run the whole Sega CD through that top cartridge slot, and that is what they are doing here. Now, as I mentioned, this has an FPGA processor built in, and this is replicating the Sega CD's hardware, which includes its 68,000 processor and some of the special video chips that particular add-on had. If you pair it up with the Analogue Mega SG, which is a clone console we looked at not that long ago, that too is FPGA powered, and you can get a really nice combination of hardware here for your HD or 4K television. And it's probably the best way to enjoy the Sega Genesis in 2019, but you're going to be paying a premium. The cartridge plus that analog console will run you about $450. But I think if you were really into the Sega Genesis as a kid, as I was, this is the best way to enjoy it. This paired up with that Mega SG. Now we're going to explore some of the software features of the cartridge in a second. There isn't much else on the hardware side beyond the fact that you've got your SD card slot here. It takes a micro SD card, and it can support up to 400 gigabytes of card capacity. That means that you could easily fit the entire library of the Genesis and Mega Drive on that card, including the CD games, I believe, which is pretty amazing to think you can fit all that stuff on a card the size of your pinky nail. It's proof that we are now definitely living in the future if you were collecting games as a kid. There's a button here which does a couple of things depending on what mode the console is in. So when you're just using Sega and Sega Mega Drive and Genesis cartridges, this doesn't do anything. But if you are in the Sega CD mode, this will switch the discs automatically for you. You can also use this button when you're playing Sega Master System games to pause the game, because those original games did not have a pause button on the controller. But otherwise, you won't have to get up much to do anything with this because it's got a great software menu. So we're going to boot it up now on my Model 2 here, and then in a few minutes after we jump through some of the features, we'll take a look and see how it interacts with my Mega SG. So let's take a look now at some of the unique features of this flash cartridge. So here we are on the main menu of the Mega SD. One thing I suggest you do when you first get it is to download the latest firmware update from Terraonion. Mine took a while to get to me, and while it was in transit, they released a pretty big firmware update that resolved some glitches I was having with the cartridge when I first put it in. So get that going. You'll also need to source BIOS files for the Sega CD, and if you plan on running European, Japanese, and American CD games on your cartridge, you'll need to get a BIOS for each of those regions. Those are not hard to find, and then once you get everything set up, you can just go in and hit the C button here to point the cartridge at those BIOS files. You'll see that option here called Select CD BIOS, and I've got a US and Japanese BIOS already loaded on here. You can have a bunch of different BIOS files and experiment with different types if you're having issues, so you can make some adjustments there. There's a couple of other options here. Some of them are self-explanatory. There are also some other tweaks like emulating the seek time of the original Sega CD. And that might be something that's important if you're noticing your game's not working properly. Some games actually depend on the slow speed of the CD drive, and if you're seeing glitches, you can enable that. The games will load slower, but you will have more reliability perhaps. You can also adjust the volume of the special audio chips that were on the Sega CD, because it did, on the original, kind of mix in those audio tracks with what the Sega Genesis console itself was generating. And that is it. So not too much on the options here for adjusting things, which I think is a good thing. It's nice to just have something that just kind of works out of the box without too many issues. Now I'm going to jump into my demo folder here, and you can see I've got a whole bunch of different stuff. So we loaded up Sonic the Hedgehog a minute ago, the US version of it right here. But if we look at the Japanese version, which is labeled with CD properly, and I just click on it here, what will happen here is it will decide which BIOS is appropriate for that game. So before we had the American BIOS loading up, now we've got the Japanese BIOS because we are loading up a Japanese Sega CD game here, and that will begin its process now of booting off the card and running, because of course the Japanese game will not run on the American BIOS. And now you can hear that we've got a whole different soundtrack on this one as well. Now if I hold down the shortcut here, which is up and start on the controller, I will get my in-game menu, and I can make adjustments to the CD volume here if I want. I can reboot the game, or if I hit return to menu here, it will reset the console and bring us back to the main menu to get started. That in-game menu will vary based on what you might be doing with the cartridge. So we'll explore some of those variances here as we work our way through the rest of the demo. Now I found most of the CD image formats I threw at it were working just fine. That included BinQ, ISO, IMG. You just put in multi-disc games in a folder together, and it will find all the discs and let you switch them by pushing the button or going through the menu. It was really nice just how seamless everything works with these CD games. I can't imagine it being easy to make it all work. And I also like the fact that it knows which BIOS goes with which game. I also loaded up a few of the FMV games to see how those played out. We'll load up Sewer Shark here, and you can see it knows it's an American game, and it's going to give us the American BIOS now here, and we can get started with this one. FMV on the Sega Genesis looks terrible. It looked terrible back in 1993, and it still looks bad now, but it does work without any real glitches that I can see. Before the firmware update, I did have some problems on my Mega SG with audio kind of skipping a bit, but now it's working fine both on the original hardware and on the modern equivalent here. And we'll let this game just start up here so you can see this FMV game in all of its glory. There's got to be a lot of good footage hanging around of these things. And I know Night Trap was recently recreated on the Nintendo Switch and I think on the PS4 and Xbox. It'd be great to see some of these games make their way back out to the world as well. We'll have to see if that ever happens, but this gives you a sense as to what these games look like. This was the pack-in game that came with my Sega CD, and you can see the limited colors of the Genesis really are challenging here, but nonetheless it's working, and it works just as well off of this SD card as it does off the original disc that I ripped this image from. So pretty cool stuff, and if you are looking to recreate the era of 90s FMV games, you can do it now on your Sega Genesis without the CD. Now it also of course supports the regular Mega Drive and Genesis games, and you get a few extra features with those games. So let's go over to Sonic the Hedgehog 3 here real quick and boot that up. This was one of the larger games that was released for the console, but this was released on cartridge. And we'll go ahead and start the game here. It does support save files and all that stuff, so you can save your games like you would on the original hardware, and it will also save those save files to the flash card so you can back them up easily. So we have my save file here that we're starting from, but if I hold down up and start on the controller here to bring up the menu, you can see we have a few other options, including save states. So what I can do here is go to load state, and I saved a portion of the game that I was in a little while earlier, and it will basically restore the game to that spot. It doesn't happen instantaneously. There is a bit of a delay, but you can see here it's dropping me off right where I had left it before. And if I want to save the state again, I can hold down start and up, and then I can save a state. I can overwrite the slot that I was in, or I can save it to a new slot here. And every game has 8 save slots, which is pretty cool. So you get some of the features that you might see on some emulators here, but on original hardware. So that works pretty nicely. But again, only with the cartridge-based games, not the CD ones. Now, also in this menu, you can access the cheat feature, and this supports Game Genie codes and Pro Action Replay codes. And what's cool is that it will save these codes to the game, and then the next time you load the game up, it will have those codes retained but not activated. And then you can activate them on a code-by-code basis here right within the menu. So that's pretty neat. You can enable these or disable these as you wish. And it's kind of neat that it will retain the code between sessions, which might be very convenient. And they recently added support for Virtua Racing, which did not work on the cartridge when it first came out about a month or so ago. So if we go here and load it up, it'll know that it needs to reprogram its FPGA to account for those special chips that were on that cartridge. That game was pretty expensive, if I remember correctly. And you can see here that 3D Sega logo is going, and we'll let the demo start up here so you can see what it looks like. It certainly doesn't challenge the arcade version, but for its time, this was a pretty slick game that looked pretty nice on Sega's aging console at that point, and you can get a feel for what that looks like here. Now, it also has support for Sega Master System games, and you can see we've got this little MS next to Zillion 2 here. We're going to load it up real quick. Now, one thing you're going to notice, though, when the game does load is that the audio is going to sound better than the original Master System did if you had one as a kid. Listen. And the reason is that it has support for FM sound, which was something that they had in Japan, but we did not get here in the US. But many games that came over from the Japanese market still had the FM sound baked in. It's just that our hardware didn't support it. So you might like this sound difference, and some games sound a lot better than they used to. But if you wanted to go back to the way you remembered it sounding, you do have to turn the console off, because unfortunately the in-game menu doesn't work on the Master System side. It only works on the original Sega Genesis cartridges. And then when you reboot, you can go back to your main menu here, and let that come up. And then we can disable the FM sound and make it sound like I remembered it sounding when I was a kid. So we'll go here and just turn that option to enable FM off, and we'll load up Zillion 2 here again, and now you'll hear it sounds a lot different. So the Master System support is pretty nice to have, but I would have liked the in-game menu to work there so you could easily jump back out if you needed to without having to shut down the console. I even found that the shortcut for resetting the cartridge wasn't working either when the Master System was booted up. So it'd be nice to see them add some support for that. Even if they can't get save states to work, maybe just having the ability to jump out of the game would be a nice additional thing to think about for future firmware updates. Now, if you are a Sega fan like I am, you likely own a 32X like I do. Now, the Mega SD supports the 32X, but only as a flash cartridge. It does not run the 32X software on its FPGA. So without the 32X here, you can't run 32X games. And there's also some limitations involved here as well. So if we go to my demo folder, you'll notice there's less in here now, because when you have the Mega SD attached to a 32X, the Sega CD does not work. So you can't run CD games when you're attached to it like I have it right now. Also, it doesn't support the Master System games either, but you can run the original Sega Genesis games, but I don't believe the in-game menu will work when you are in this configuration. Now, there are a handful of games that support Sega CD and the 32X, and there's apparently an adapter out there somewhere that allows you to plug the cartridge into the side of the Genesis or the Mega Drive, and then you can run those 32X games that way, but you have to have the 32X here attached. So it really is just going to work like a flash cartridge when you have a 32X attached. Unfortunately, it cannot be a 32X itself, which would have been awesome, but I'll take what I can get here. The in-game menu doesn't work, save states don't work, but it is able to load the games up here and have them run successfully. And I was able to play a few 32X games a little bit earlier, and they all look and play great, just like they do if I had an original cartridge attached to it. All right, and one last thing to look at, and that is the FPGA pairing of the decade here. We've got the cartridge that will handle all of our Sega CD stuff, and then we've got the Analogue Mega SG that will handle all of the Sega Genesis components of this match. And if we go back to our Mega SD cartridge, you'll see the same menu we had on the original hardware. I'm just going to go here to the last game, which was Sonic CD, and it will boot up the CD BIOS as it did before. And if I hit the start button here, we can load up that CD game just like we were doing on the original hardware. And let's listen in and see how it all works here as the main menu comes up. And it looks like it's pretty legit. It seems to be working just like it did on the original hardware. And we're able to get the Sega CD games running here on the Mega SG without actually having the original CD hardware, which is great if you are looking to get into Sega CD and don't have access to the hardware or don't want to fuss with aging 20-plus-year-old CD-ROM drives. I think this is going to be a great solution for you. And if you have any experience with the Mega SG, you'll know just how good these Sega Genesis games look and run on it. And this gives you now all of the CD games in a much more convenient format. So let's test out a couple of other things real quick. The save states are important on the Mega SG because it doesn't support that natively in the hardware. So we're just going to go ahead and overwrite slot 1 here with a save state. And hopefully when this is done, it will allow us to keep going here. So I'm going to maybe just reboot this game real quick and then load up that save state and see what happens here. So we'll just initiate the in-game menu, load state. We'll go to state 1 here, and hopefully it will drop us off right where we left off. Yep, there it is. So it looks like save states are working properly on the Mega SG. Let's go back to the main menu here and make sure the master system is working. And I think we'll have a very good solution here for getting our Sega CD games to work, along with some of the other features that you might want, like save states, at least on the Sega Genesis side. And of course, the master system is working here as well. So altogether, I think we've got ourselves a pretty good solution. Let me turn it off here real quick, for getting all of your Sega CD games now to work on original hardware without a Sega CD or on the Mega SG here. I'm quite pleased with how this is working so far, and it will certainly simplify my modern Sega connection upstairs because I no longer have to have that ugly old Sega CD here paired up with my sleek new console. So I've got a little bit more room now on the home theater bench, and I'm quite pleased with what Terraonion has put together here. It is not inexpensive, so just keep that in mind. But if you are a Sega fan looking for the best, I think you can't go wrong here getting this cartridge that can get you a lot of great games on your Sega Genesis hardware or the new modern stuff that you see here from Analogue. Very cool, and I am quite pleased with it. Now, I'll also put a link down below to some other videos that I watched on the Mega SD before mine came in that I thought were very good and dive into a little bit more detail than I'm doing here. So definitely check those out from some of my favorite creators. And until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold-level supporters, the Four Guys with Quarters podcast, Chris Allegretta, Tom Albrecht, Mike Talbert, Brian Parker, and Kalyan Kumar. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit Lon.TV/S.